There are many approaches one can take in analyzing 1981 cult film Possession, as there is a variety of different themes and ideas running parallel with each other. I wouldn't say there is one singular meaning and interpretation that answers all the questions one may ask upon viewing the film, but instead a deeper understanding can be achieved through the culmination of interpretations of the film's themes and implications. Some of those interpretations may also be self-contradictory. I must note, there is so much going on in this film that it can be difficult to know where to begin. For example, I could begin to discuss the setting of Berlin, the significance of the opening shots establishing the division of the people, and how that mirrors the division of Mark and Anna, the film's central couple. Or I could discuss the connection and division of the audience with the film within the film. I could discuss how faith, or lack thereof, shapes the behaviors and eventual fates of the main characters, and how this ties to Anna's monologue about the two sisters, Faith and Chance, and then how that is expressed in the famous subway scene. Each of these topics could make for videos of their own, but I have instead decided to begin with an interpretative analysis on something about this film I feel does not get much exposure: the ambiguous sexuality of the film's protagonist, Mark, and how said sexuality influences his daily life, internal thoughts, and the traditional family structure around him. In the beginning of the film, we see Mark first in a state of confusion and perhaps paranoia. We soon find out Anna is contemplating leaving him. He seems to be quite accepting of this and shows respect for a request for distance. Right after, we see them talking to each other through different rooms, implying their physical and emotional separation. Here we learn that it is their son, Bob, that seems to be keeping them together for this long, which is expressed here. We can conclude that the remaining strength of the relationship is heavily dependent on raising Bob. In Mark and Anna's discussion turn violent outbursts at the cafe, the first thing Mark does in efforts to persuade Anna to stay is threaten to not see Bob again.
I've decided not to see Bob.
At all?
At all.
How can you say that?
I think such a comment shows that Mark is bluffing. There is no real indication otherwise that he would ever abandon his son. In fact, if anything, he is much more responsible with caring for and raising him than Anna is. Bob is the central controlling force that keeps Mark and Anna together. For Mark, what is most important is maintaining the family structure to raise Bob, whether that structure includes Anna or someone else taking her place. There are many reasons for why Anna would grow sick of Mark and want to leave beyond possible demon possession. After all, he is a violent drunk who is never home, loses his temper in public, and even resorts to domestic abuse when pushed. But there is something more beneath the surface that strikes me as a possible cause, and this is Mark's sexuality. To be frank, he comes across as someone who may be gay, or at the very least have gay tendencies. Such tendencies make him insecure as a husband, as a father, and as a man. About 3 minutes into the film, we see the couple laying naked in bed. This is after it was established that Anna is wanting to separate. Could it be that they attempted and failed to have sexual intercourse in efforts to repair their dwindling relationship? They both look quite distraught in their own ways. Mark rationalizes the situation by saying it is a common phase among couples. But what exactly is he referring to?
All right, well, what's happening to us is just natural. Feelings change.
When asked if he had been unfaithful to her, he has quite an interesting response.
What was I doing it for, after all?
Were you unfaithful to me?
The truth is, not really.
How is it that someone is not really unfaithful? I have read some interpreting this as meaning he had an affair that he only engaged in because his job as a spy required it of him. Perhaps this would explain the subject in question in the briefing scene with his employers. In other words, he did what the job asked, thus not really being unfaithful. The way I interpret this, however, is that he may have engaged in an affair with another man during his time away, or was required to for his job. Either way, he did not engage in a traditionally conventional affair. When asked how he feels about her now, he replies with blatant emotional disinterest towards her as the camera pans away.
But without you, I wouldn't feel anything at all.
What do you feel now?
Are you really interested?
No.
you see, it's the same with me. I don't even want you now.
Despite this, Mark continuously does his best to restore order in his family and fights for Anna to be a part of it. In other words, sex and romance are not nearly as important to Mark as maintaining the nuclear family. Mark goes to extreme lengths to preserve the family and explains that despite Anna's apparent love for another, she must stay in it. On the other hand, Anna feels it is wrong to carry on, perhaps indicating their differing perspectives of the importance of marriage and the disconnect from pleasure and responsibility.
Anna, is there anything I can do?
If you could just...
Yes.
I must.
Yes?
I must.
You must restore order. You must leave him. You will call him. You will say it is over. Now, I don't care if you tell him you love him, but he's not your family. Your family is here.
In fact, Mark persuades her by displaying physical affection for the first time, something desperately lacking in their marriage.
It'll be the way you want. You just don't cry anymore.
We cut to them naked, and Mark acts very awkward with his wife, as if he is uncomfortable with the idea of sex with her, but knows that it is what she wants and believes it is his obligation in the family unit to sleep with her. We don't really know for sure if they engage in intercourse, but based on a later scene, I am led to believe they didn't. We can deduce from this that Mark is less interested in sex as Anna, and plenty of scenes that follow back this up. The physical gestures Mark expresses are repeated several times throughout the film. Żuławski himself has commented on these repeated patterns before.
If you touch a body of somebody you love, the skin, the softness of it, the whiteness of it, the warmth of it, it tells you things about what's going on, where the person is going, is she staying, etc. So, but also the body is so delicate. We don't have furs. We don't have plates on it. We were so naked, And so he touches. In fact, as far as I remember, he touches his son once and his wife once, and it's absolutely the same gesture of love.
It seems to me that he views both his son and wife equally as family members. He gives the same physical gestures to Anna and to Bob. There is perhaps little difference in the way he expresses love to both of them. His love for his wife is lacking of sexual attraction. Upon searching for answers, Mark finds out about Heinrich, a man who had an ongoing affair with Anna while he was away. It is implied that Bob had even met him. Mark visits Heinrich to confront him, and here begins a sex competition between the two. In this scene, Mark is seen on a new low as his own insecurities are brought to light. Heinrich asks if Mark had slept with Anna during his last visit. Mark answers the question with a question, implying lack of confidence and self-esteem with the true answer.
I have been honest with you. Would you permit me to inquire on a specific point? On your last visit home, were you content with your wife? I mean, sexually.
Why?
Because in that period, we reached a state of perfect harmony.
This triggers Mark into a violent outburst, possibly with the intent to kill Heinrich in front of his mother, and he is then bested by Heinrich with apparent ease. In Mark's mind, Heinrich has the upper hand. An almost inverse of the scene happens about 20 minutes later. This time Heinrich is in a position of confusion, blind rage, and insecurity. Heinrich does not know the whereabouts of Anna. Mark has someone seemingly taken the motherly and wifely role in the house that looks identical to Anna. Heinrich is jealous because Mark appears to have what he does not have. Mark is content and happy to see Heinrich this way, feeling that he has surpassed him as a man. At one point of this conversation, Mark tells Heinrich that he likes him.
Why don't you like me? Why don't you draw on the plenitude of my love and pour it all over you like fertile rain?
Okay, I like you.
Of course, this could be a sarcastic remark reflecting their competitive relationship. But there are several cases of possible sexual innuendo and homoerotic undertones between the two. Mark then verbally acknowledges the sexual contest between the two.
It's impossible. It doesn't make sense.
Why not? Because you think you've given her supreme pleasure? You with your yin-yang balls dangling from your Zen brain? Okay, maybe it does boil down to a sexual contest, in which case I'm sure you win hands down.
He condescendingly admits Heinrich is better than him in that department. He later tells Heinrich's mother the following.
Now, listen to me. I recognize Heinrich's superiority in every way. I was proud that Anna accepted him.
These don't appear to be normal qualities of a heterosexual male husband. Even if he isn't attracted to men, Mark exhibits behaviors of sexual incompetence towards women and an insecurity as a result of that. However, this scene in contrast shows him content with his role, as he is in the lead in this competition of masculinity, despite the acknowledgement of sexual inferiority, which appears to be something Mark is personally not as interested in, beyond social stigma and making the family stronger. The sexual competition between Mark and Heinrich continues, which I'll get to later in this video. Doppelgangers of the couple are used in this film perhaps to represent the ideal versions of both Mark and Anna to the other person. The film ultimately ends with the original two being replaced. Helen is Anna's doppelganger and represents Mark's ideal version of Anna as a mother and wife. She is calm, caring, rational, intelligent, and understanding, qualities that Anna does not consistently manage. While there are plenty of clues to suggest Helen is an alien or divine entity, I'll focus more on what she means to Mark, especially if he is not heterosexual. Bob questions his father as to who he thinks is prettier, Anna or Helen. He responds with, "Our mummy."
Who's prettier, Mummy or Helen?
Who do you think is prettier?
You tell me.
Our mummy.
He does not say your mummy, but instead says our, perhaps indicating that prettiness is based less on attraction and more on the shared familiar bond. Mark also says he does not want Anna to like Heinrich more than him and his son.
I don't like Heinrich, and I don't like that sailboat.
Why? He's funny.
I don't like Mummy to like him more than us.
Additionally, Bob asks him if he likes Helen, and his response indicates uncertainty.
Do you like Helen?
I think so.
Are you not sure?
Well, I don't know her yet. Do you like her?
Mark puts emphasis on one's character over appearance to determine whether or not they can fulfill the motherly role to Bob. In an exchange of dialogue between Mark and Helen, Mark opens up on his lack of understanding towards women and his rather narrow and perhaps misogynistic view of them.
What can I say? I'm at war against women. They have no foresight. There's nothing about them that is stable. There's nothing to trust. They're dangerous.
This lack of interest in women has led him to this point of confusion. Mark becomes impressed with Helen's lengthy response and begins to see her embodying the role of wife and mother. Out of obligation, he prepares to have sex with her in efforts to consummate their new relationship.
You don't have to make love to me.
I'm not trying.
He reacts with a huge sigh of relief and displays happiness. He doesn't need to make love, and he doesn't want to make love, but wants to restore the nuclear family. Understanding what the monster is crucial in the development of theories for this film. There is much room for interpretation as to what exactly the monster is, anywhere from an alien, the devil, and to even God. I believe in a way the monster represents the ideal version of Mark, ideal both to Mark as a character to strive to be, and to Anna to love in a physical way. After all, the monster is able to please Anna in ways Mark is unable to. When Anna has sex with the monster, Mark observes and becomes more mesmerized than he does disgusted, to a point where he seems to understand Anna. The monster begins taking on a more human form as the film progresses, to the point that it even becomes physically identical to Mark, save for the eyes. Excluding the lead couple, 4 people are killed over the course of the film, being the private investigator, his male lover, Heinrich, and Margie. Each of these victims have seen the monster and in some way reflect an obstacle getting in the way of Mark and Anna's love. The first victim, the private detective, could very well represent Mark's job, seeing that going undercover as a spy of some sort appears to be what he does for a living. His job caused long-distance separation from his family and ultimately led to Anna's subsequent affairs and then downfall of their relationship. The private detective sees the monster and is then killed by Anna. Perhaps this is her killing off the block in their relationship? One of the next obstacles in their way that must be destroyed before Mark becomes the ideal person for her is his homosexuality. And what do you know, the next victim reveals himself to be the lover of the private detective. This is an interesting detail that brings more weight to the situation at hand, and more weight if you agree with his victim theory. Also, I must take note that the lover reveals his sexual orientation in a literally touching scene.
You might be able to understand that my interest in the case comes from the fact that I live with that detective. I'll be calling.
Like his lover before him, he too sees the monster and is then killed by Anna. She takes yet another stab of an obstacle in their way, his sexual preference in a sense. It is also fitting that prior to this murder, she says the following words.
He's very tired. He made love to me all night.
Upon seeing the lovers' bodies reunited, Mark laughs, and then undergoes a significant character change right before our eyes. The next two victims are Heinrich and Margie, two obstacles in the way of them, this time more so in the way of Mark, with both being an insult to his masculinity. Heinrich is the only victim to be able to first see the monster and then escape Anna's murderous ways. In a way, he first gets away, similar to how Mark had previously accepted Heinrich to be sexual superior, and then allowed him to carry on. The masculinity contest seemingly ends when Mark finds Heinrich bleeding from a knife attack. Their banter back and forth includes several references to gender. At one point, Heinrich, seemingly at random, calls Mark a woman.
You're not a man, Mark, you're a woman.
Mark, on the other hand, makes two references to menstruation, comparing Heinrich to a woman on her period.
Paid a fortune for the cab.
At the bar at the corner.
Is that what I do?
Bleed for a while.
And then here.
Need a temper?
This isn't the only case when menstruation is referenced. After all, the infamous subway scene, I am sure, can be compared to menstruation, and then there's this bit of exchange of dialogue with Helen.
There is nothing in common among women except menstruation.
Ultimately, Heinrich is killed at the hands of Mark, and then soon after, Margie is shown bleeding to her death. She was perhaps seen as another potential threat to the relationship, and therefore killed, in efforts to achieve their ideal goal for themselves. In large contrast to the bedroom scene towards the beginning, after having the victims' deaths, or in other words, obstacles removed from the equation, Mark is finally able to have sexual intercourse with Anna. Because the spiritual references in Possession are so prominent, they're best served for another video. I will not dwell on them much here, beyond the references that directly tie to the topic of the video. Take note that I said the monster could also very well represent a spiritual force, perhaps even God. Could it be in the sense that Mark is cured from his homosexuality because of his divine intervention? At the very least, divine intervention is referenced directly before and after the sex scene.
Do you believe in God? It's in me.
Is this faith that helpless?
So even if you don't agree with my interpretation of the sexual orientation, you can at least reason with the spiritual force bringing them close together physically. A notable scene follows depicting Mark witnessing his wife have sex with the monster, much to his admiration. Anna says,
Almost.
not to the monster but to Mark, which could simply refer to her almost climaxing, but also serve as a signifier that something thematically is about to reach a conclusive change. Something that could be used to counter my interpretative argument about Mark's sexual orientation is how he interacts and possibly flirts with Margie. He expresses loathing towards her and reluctance in bringing her in to help take care of Bob in Anna's absence. Yet it seems in this scene that his hateful comments are possibly sarcastic and that he is accepting her advances.
Give me your sweater.
I loathe you, Marge.
You're still full of belief, Mark. I love seeing you miserable. It's so reassuring.
Shit, Marge.
I do find this part of the film to be a bit of a gray area because it suggests a history between the two that may have involved a sexual affair that she urges him to return to. There are hints that they may have been intimate with each other during this time of separation from Anna, but why would someone who prefers men sleep with Margie? Well, under the guise that they are getting physical, we must question whether or not this is their first time. If it is, it can be a reason that sex is a compromise Mark feels he must adhere to in order to preserve the family structure, as I have stated previously. He may also mean it when he says he loathes her, but ultimately accepts that he may need her for the time being. If we speculate they have had a history of affairs, we must also acknowledge the character's gender are not entirely concrete. After all, there was this scene where Heinrich calls Mark a woman randomly.
You're not a man, Mark, you're a woman.
Then there is this interesting scene. Mark tucks his son in bed and then does the same for Margie, repeating the same words he told Bob to Margie.
Tired? Why? Let's get you up here. That's... Oh, look at this. Tired? Why? Let's get you up here.
He calls both Bob and Margie a tired boy.
Tired? Why? Tired? Why?
Possibly Margie's gender is undefined, or that in this temporary family structure, Mark views both the woman and his son in the same familiar light, but less so as individuals, but more so as ideas. I do not think Margie disproves Mark's sexuality, but it definitely is something to look into if you are going to accept this theory. One of the mysteries that surround this film is the details of what exactly Mark's job is. Earlier I mentioned Mark may have slept with another man for his job, and this scene may or may not support this. I'll let you interpret it for yourself.
What time did you meet him?
8:30.
Where?
In the park.
Was he willing?
Yes, verbally.
Did you sense or detect weariness in him?
No, a correct appraisal of the realities.
Is that making him bitter?
No, greedy.
But you felt his power.
You mean, did I feel fear? No, because that would have prevented me answering all your questions.
Any questions?
Does our subject still wear pink socks?
This scene is extremely ambiguous. The man asks if the subject wore pink socks, which can be attributed to flamboyant Western culture. To make matters more confusing, the agent who asked about pink socks is sitting in the same room as the man who is later revealed to have pink socks. As I said, I do not think details of his job and references to pink socks necessarily correlate with Mark's sexual orientation, but I found these details interesting, even if they were aimless, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to cover them. After behaving immorally like Anna, Mark finds himself bleeding to death on the staircase metaphorically between the points of heaven and hell. Now with the issue of his sexuality out of the way, the old Mark needs not to exist, making room for the new. Mark attempts to do away with him, only for it to backfire, bringing Anna and him both together finally, but with the unfortunate inconvenience of dying. Now let's make sense of the ending and how it pertains to everything I've discussed so far. Based on what I gathered, Mark was right in attempting to preserve the family structure and did his best to fight for Anna, and in her absence replace her. The marriage itself may have been toxic and problematic due to a number of reasons, including sexual incompatibility and physical and emotional abuse, but it was that structure that Bob has come to know, being raised by his parents rather than the ideal versions of them.
Please don't open! Don't Don't know. Don't know. Don't know. Don't know. Don't know. Don't know.
Bob being able to detect something is not right is alluded to previously. Helen, impressed with Bob, tells Mark how children observe and see everything.
Bob won't say anything to me. He keeps his worries for himself. But he knows everything, senses everything. Children are amazing.
This shows the hardships of children being affected by divorce and their ability to sense fake smiles and repressed emotions by their parents. In this case, Bob is accustomed to the toxicity of his upbringing, which is ultimately stronger for his own personal growth. With the personal traits of his parents now lost, with the ideal versions replacing them, Bob's understanding of the world around him has changed and been replaced with artificiality rather than the hardships of reality that would help him grow stronger and wiser. Under this interpretation, Mark's homosexuality affects multiple aspects of the narrative. Far more important than his sexual preference is the fact that Mark cares for his wife and loves her in a familiar way. He feels marital sex is an obligation he must abide by in order to maintain a healthy marriage. In order to preserve the family structure, he seeks Margie and then Helen, willing to do whatever it takes to build a family, even sacrificing his own sexual comfort. He also fights to get Anna back, less so for him personally and more so for Bob's sake. He eventually comes to terms with what is getting in the way of their marriage and does everything he can do to destroy the parts of him that are not ideal, eventually losing all sense of individuality and destroying the family and himself along the way. As I alluded to, this is one of several interpretations I have of this film. I happen to also be drawn to its spiritual and political subtext that I have hinted at already. Keep in mind this video reflects my personal reading of the film and should not be taken as definitive fact. After all, it is just a theory, and you know what Żuławski says about theories.
Here again, we go theoretical. But I don't care about theories. I hate theory, you know that.